What I'm most interested in is mastery of self through mastery of craft. The world of the mind is invisible. Feelings are invisible. Emotions are observable. But the worlds of thoughts are completely invisible. I was so anxious as a young person. I had to earn a set of principles and practices to live in the present moment, because anxiety is the exact opposite. Life happens in the present. High performance happens in the present moment. All things true, beautiful, good, and amazing happen in the present. All this stuff that requires honesty happens in the present moment. The hard parts of life also happen in the present. A fundamental commitment to spend as much time as I possibly can in the present moment gives me access to what is honest, what is true. When we spend time in the present moment, we start to get to the truer nature of things. Then we start to have insights about how things work. You're drawing some connections. And then with a bunch of insights, you get down to that universal wisdom, the simplest way of understanding the true nature of something. From present moment to insights to wisdom, there's no shortcut that I'm aware of other than speeding up the practices to be in the present moment more often.
Greetings and a warm welcome back to Intersections. Our focus here, as many of you know, is to dissolve the boundaries, is to find a way to help us forge a path towards our highest potential in life and at work, individually and collectively. And this dissolving of boundaries for today with us is going to happen through the inner versus outer game that we have to play in life. How can excellence on the outside be achieved through mastery on the inside? I have with us Dr. Michael Gervais. He is one of the world's top high-performance psychologists. He's a leading expert on that relationship between the mind on the inside and human performance on the outside. He is the founder of Finding Mastery, a high-performance psychology consulting agency that works with leaders and teams and organizations so that they can thrive at that intersection of high performance and well-being. And his clients include Fortune 100 CEOs, but also Olympic athletes and gold medalists, Super Bowl winning NFL franchises, and the best in the world of business and sports and art and science. Michael's work has been featured in lots of leading media, such as the Harvard Business Review and CNN, ESPN, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Outside Magazine. He is also an acclaimed keynote speaker, a co-creator of the Performance Science Institute at the University of Southern California, Marshall School of Business, and is the author of the national bestseller, The First Rule of Mastery. And he hosts the Finding Mastery podcast as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome in our midst Dr. Michael Gervais. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for the warm introduction, and it's awesome to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you. It is for me too. It's been a real reward for me to experience you, know you, learn from you, have some of these very connected conversations that we've had in recent times, Mike, and the fact that we are now here together to allow me to formally usher you into the world of intersections and invite our audience to also experience your energy gives me great joy.
Congratulations, before we get started, on what your body of work and what you've built and the community that you've supported. It's really inspiring, and I hope you feel that. From the outside, it's amazing, and I'm really honored to be part of it today.
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, I want to say the same about your path and your work, and you being very gracious, which I know you to be just instinctually. And it's quite beautiful for me to see how many points of intersection there are, you know, between your work and the ideas that I've been proffering and exploring as well in mine. And some of that is going to unfold, I'm sure, in the conversation that just happens. But listen, you know, to just get us started, I mean, you just got back from Paris. You were at the Paris Olympics.
I was. Yeah, it was. What a place. Like, first of all, Paris is infinitely beautiful. Around every corner you turn, you know, there's a marketplace or a structure that is just gorgeous. The people were absolutely electric in the city, supporting the games. And, you know, you've got about 10,000 athletes that are the best athletes on the planet gathering in one of the most competitive environments where they've been training 16, 20 years, sometimes just a handful of years, but that's really the outlier, to test themselves amongst the best. And it is a place for big emotions. If you're afraid of big emotions, the world stage of athletics in this way is not going to be enjoyable. So it was big emotions, big ambitions. The hallmark of the whole thing is how well can you be connected to your first principles? How well can you execute the craft that you have dedicated your life to be great at? And how well can you stay connected to your people, your team? And all three of those are on full display.
You were not there just as a spectator. You were actually helping support some of the athletes there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. This is officially my fourth Olympic Games. And I was included with a women's beach volleyball team this year. And what was exciting about it was they have never podiumed. And the coach that I had worked with, Misty May and Carrie Walsh, are considered two of the best to ever play the game in beach volleyball. And I was able to work with them for about 12 years with the coach Marcio. So we did the London Olympics, we did the Rio Olympics. In Tokyo, I worked with surfing, and then I got another opportunity with beach volleyball, this one. So this one was the first time it was not with Team USA. I supported Team Canada. So there was an interesting internal experience for me about supporting a different country, which was great. And the narrative was that they had never podiumed. They're on the outside looking in. They're a really good team, but just short of what it would take to podium. And Hitendra, we took a silver. And so, but they did it. They completely did it. It was magical for them to see them deliver, when the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, amazing. What a wonderful story. Did you in that time with them? So there's the coach and they do the technical and functional side of the mastery game. But then they also bring you in as a mind coach, as a performance coach, from the inside. What is that like? Like what are some of the practices that you were helping support them on the ground right there in the heat of the battle?
So usually you work with a team for a full quad for 4 years. However, I was introduced to the team 2 years ago. So the bulk of the work happens in the 2 years leading up. And there's two ways that we went about it. We did full team meetings. So with the two coaches, myself and the two athletes, and we had those on a semi-regular basis. And I'm just giving you the structure, and I can get into actually what we did as well. We had a mindset camp where I would meet with the athlete twice a day for a week straight. We did two of those, a total of 4 weeks. We did some international trips together, so we knew how to work together in an international setting. And then there was one-on-one with the athletes, and then there was just the athletes and myself. So that's kind of the basic structure to give you what a 2-year arc would look like. And it's probably 80-20. 80% of my time with the team and the athletes is in an office setting, and 20% it happens, or maybe 25% happens on the beach. And so while we're in the office setting, the less noisy environment, if you will, the early part of the work is deep work to really know and better understand who each of us are, to share our first principles, our dreams and our hopes and our ambitions, why those matter. We share our tripwires for anxiety and frustration. We share our fears. So we do the deeper work. The more ancient work is like, who are you? And then the more modern work is, how are we going to work together in a modern setting that, at some level, sport is this made up thing. And listen, it's the community that I love. But if the world were coming to an end, we probably don't need sport other than for what it is, entertainment for most people. So we need to put it in context of like the larger picture of life, and also honor how much time they are dedicated for their life towards it. So we do the deep, 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 deep work.
I want you to talk more about this, Mike, but I do want to say that you're being very humble about it. I know sports means a lot to you in your professional trajectory. We want to come back and talk a little bit more about that. But I also feel like it's a tremendous sort of crucible in which, there's a certain elevation of the human condition that happens both for the athletes in the pursuit of excellence that they're taking on, which is ultimately at some level very aligned with like a goal of self-realization, of self-transcendence, of self-actualization, but also, the folks who follow the game and the level of fusion and attunement that happens between them and the athletes and the quest of a certain nation to win certain glory and all. I mean, there's a fair amount of a hero's journey that happens, isn't it?
It really is. It will test you, and it will expose the links in your philosophical chain, the weak links in your first principles, in your mental, physical, and technical practices. It will test you, and when you come up against that test, it exposes where the weaknesses and strengths are. And the crucible is a good word because, again, it's for big emotions. There's a lot that happens when it's you with yourself, with another competitor or Mother Nature. You learn a lot about yourself. And that's what I love about it. What I'm most interested in, Hitendra, is mastery of self through mastery of craft. And it's the intersection of the two that feels so tangible. Yeah, let me just stop on the tangible, because the world that you and I spend so much time appreciating is invisible. The world of the mind is invisible. Feelings are invisible. Emotions are observable, but the worlds of thoughts are completely invisible. And when you have a tangible craft like sport, it's just a great way to reveal your inner world.
Beautiful framing of the role of sports as a catalyzer of that sort of inner mastery work. So I really appreciate that. It reminds me just a few months ago, and we should then get back to what was actually very illuminating, the description you're giving of the actual work that, you were doing on the ground with this group, this team. But a few months ago, I was taking a walk in Los Angeles, in Mount Washington, close to the headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, the spiritual order started by Yogananda. And I had with me a dear friend, Apollo Ono, right, the Olympian. And in this walk, we were bumping into some of my monk friends, from Self-Realization Fellowship. And when they noticed the gentleman next to me and recognized him or were introduced to him and, realized he was Apollo, they were just so happy, bursting with, a smile and, a joyful and admiring and appreciating kind of, gesture from their side. And then later on, one of the monks, I mean, look, their life is so different. I mean, it's more, secluded in some ways and more about renouncing many of these quests in the world. But one of them shared with me, said that, whenever the Olympics, come around, he said in the past, there was this one of the senior monks that we had who since, passed on, but he used to really encourage us to appreciate, the passion, the commitment, the drive, the discipline that goes into pursuing excellence in an Olympian kind of capacity. And he said, look, I mean, they have their goal, and this is kind of the power of what they're bringing to pursue that goal. And if we could bring that same kind of world-class excellence in our pursuit of God realization, how fast we would develop and evolve.
That's amazing. And that is, so when we see one, Apollo is a friend, and I have such regard for what he's done and how he's organized his life. And most notably, how he changed himself, really fundamentally changed his approach to life, both from a technical, physical, and mental standpoint to pursue his best. So he was already a gold medalist. And then he thought forward 4 years, who do I need to become in the next 4 years to give myself a chance of being the best in the world and to be my very best? And he abandoned his entire approach to being the best in the world because he understood fundamentally what got me here won't get me there. And that takes radical risk to do. And so when we see Olympians or whatever champions that the national anthem is being played and they've got a medal around their neck, and we say to ourselves, oh man, they are so special. And it must be nice to be born, with such physical gifts. And they do have many physical gifts. But what we're missing is something far deeper, which is the fundamental commitments they've made in their life to pursue in an honest way their very best. And it comes at a high tax. It is difficult to do because at the seed of the whole thing, in the spiritual world and the physical world of sport, the seed of the whole thing is awareness. And it's becoming more aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your physicality, and the world around you. And so that awareness, whatever the human endeavor is kind of ground zero. And then to make fundamental commitments with that information to pursue it in a, let's call it a world-class way, is very hard to do. It's incredibly hard to do. And nobody does it alone. Even the individual contributors like Apollo had a full team to support and challenge him, to support and challenge. So we need our teachers, we need our people that conditionally respect us and unconditionally respect us. And that might be confusing for the spiritual world, but I'm happy to open that up as well.
Yeah. Okay. Let's come back to that. You, as part of the team, were just taking us through some of the routines and practices that that you do to help embed mastery in these wonderful volleyball players who have catapulted themselves to silver medalist fame. So, if you don't mind, can we go back to that that description that you were sharing? Because I'd love to hear more.
Of course. So the beginning of the work is the deep work, which you would be very familiar with. It would be you would actually add quite a bit to the sport world of your depth and what you have to offer. And so it is that deep, rich work about who are you, commingled in this world of elite athletics that you're in. And if you can go deeper, who are you without sport? And so that takes time. There's no shortcuts here. That just takes time. And for the most part, it's an ongoing life quest to better understand. So it's not like we say, right, you did the work, check the box. You know your purpose, your philosophy is clear, you have a clear vision, and that box checked. It's not that simple, of course. But at some point in time, we try to shift gears to principles, and then we try to shift gears to skills. So if you go deep work, then principles, then skills. And the principles flow out of the deep work, and then the skills flow out of the principles. What do I mean by that? So a fundamental principle could be, I am committing to be a great teammate, or I am committing to be my best, or I am committing to be the best. So from that, we would design a mental skills training program. The athlete tells us their first principles. And then my job is to question it from a bunch of different angles, better understand it, enrich it, make it more clear, make it almost like so tangible that when somebody talks about their vision in life, they're using their imagination to see a compelling future. We want to make sure that it's so tangible that it's like we could feel the fabric of it, and both people can understand exactly what it is, and then we agree to support and challenge each other to see if that thing can come true. And this is what's unique in sport that's maybe doesn't show up in other supportive relationships, is that I want to understand the athletes and the athletes want to understand mine when you do it right. So we're in it together, and it's bi-directional, as opposed to the traditional model in psychology is that it's all about the athlete. That actually feeds narcissism. That feeds a self-obsession, as opposed to feeding the collective, which is understand my ambitions and goals. And this is now me breaking the mold. I'm classically trained as a psychologist. This is now me breaking the mold with what traditional theory and science would suggest. Like if you go back to psychoanalysis, it was like the therapist had zero place in it. And right. And then in cognitive behavioral theory, it's like self-disclosure, maybe sometimes, but kind of not really condoned.
It is quite
And
radical to think of it this way.
so this is a first principle of mine, which is that we're all interconnected. I know you would recognize that as a first principle, probably for yours. And so if I am cold and unknown, and I'm asking an athlete to be vulnerable and expressive, it doesn't quite work in an honest way. So I want the focus to be on the interconnectedness, not just the one celebrating their achievements. And so we are stronger when we're together, and the therapeutic alliance is just that. You're not alone. We're in it together. And I am not the wise sage coldly removed. I am a contributor to the whole here. And there might be times when I come short of being stoic, or I come short of being poised. And so we need to prepare for that too.
Just in that, and what you just said, Mike, are some great insights about how to bring out the best in people, because I can relate that to best practices in teaching as well, beyond coaching. And even when you look at great spiritual teachers, I've often found that a lot of their work happens through stories, right? And often they are the subject of some of those stories, their own life journey, their own struggles and learnings and pivots and all of that. And just at the right time, the right moment, depending on what, the message is that the audience needs, the messenger might become part of the message, right? And in some of those stories and examples, you very translated that on craft here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to make sure, like, this is another like foundational kind of approach for me personally, is that I don't want to be the sage that has it all understood and buttoned up and pretend I don't. So I just, it's really clear to me. I'm just trying to figure it out too. And so I think what that does is it gives permission for, because they look at the coach oftentimes like for guidance and help, and that is a part of our role. And some of the guidance and help I can offer is like, hey, I'm just trying to figure it out too. I've maybe read one more book and maybe done one more meditation than you, or not, right? But like, um, so that ends up creating, I think, an honesty in the approach, and as opposed to, okay, hold on, the honesty in the approach. And what that does is it allows me in the relationship to continually ask them for their solutions. And my basic assumption is this high regard for the other person, that they have faced hard times and challenges in their past, and they have navigated that with success and not success. And so I just want to keep understanding, like, how have you navigated this before? What answers already lie within you? It's not my answer for you. It's not the coach's answer, which is a mistake, right? Now the coach is on a pedestal, and the athlete or the student or a patient is like in a different, level. No. I hold some answers. You hold some answers. We have infinite wisdom within ourselves, so it's really important that we're constantly tapping into that. So there's some gems in there, I think. And then the most concrete of the whole thing is, what are the mental skills that we help them practice? And Hitendra, those are so simple. Humans are the most complex ecosystem on the planet. And so there's deep complexity for each person because they're so unique. And then the practices of mental skills are incredibly simple. And what joins those two together is the word of it being complicated. It's hard to take the complex and the simple and figure out how to merge those. But the mental skills, I'm sure you know all of them: breathing training, self talk training, mental imagery, pre performance routines, ways to let go of mistakes, using your imagination to cast clarity of a vision. Like, these mental skills are not net new, and they're actually quite simple. Mindfulness and meditation. So figuring out how to uniquely square those simple set of practices with a very unique person is actually quite complicated.
How pervasive are these inner life sort of disciplines today in, world class competition in sports?
For the first time over the last 4 games that I've supported and officially worked in, the first one in London, I was a bit of an outcast. That's not quite the right word. I was the outlier. And so much so that I didn't know another sports psych that was on the grounds working with a team other than the 3 that were hired for the United States Olympic Committee, and 2 of them were on the grounds for about 600 athletes. And I was there for 2. And And so that was an outlier approach because the team said, no, we want you there full time. And the world wasn't there yet valuing the practices of sports psychology. However, Hitendra, this is only 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when I would ask the question to a coach or an athlete, hey, at your level, and this is like the elite of the elite, at your level, how important is the mental part of the game? And whether they're playing in the NFL or the NBA or at the Olympic level, you know what they would say? Oh, at this level, it's like 90%. It's 75%. It's like 80%. And so I would say, okay, let's just say it's 50. How much time do you spend in your day, in your week, on the mental, training the mental skills to be your very best? And they'd say, well, what do you mean? Okay, so that's 20 years ago. Fast forward to this last Olympics in Paris. There's in the Olympic Village, there is a gym for all of the athletes, and it's an amazing gym. It's like it's the best athletes on the planet working out in a gym together. It's quite a thing to see. And in the same building as the gym, not down, go outside and go around the hallway and upstairs to a place. In the same building, there was about a third of the size of the gym was a mindset room. It was for meditation. It was for mindfulness work. It was for VR work, for imagination. They had a place to write postcards to your people at home. So that was a relationship place. There was, yes, it's a painting work there. And then there was just another kind of area that's really quiet if you wanted to go do some self-reflection or whatever you wanted. It was the first time ever that there was a mindfulness / meditation / mindfulness mindset room for athletes to engage in. And that's awesome. So that shows the commitment and the arc. And there was more sports psychs there than I've ever seen before. So it was really refreshing.
Mike, you had your roots in working in the sports arena, right? And yet you also built a very powerful bridge into the business world, into helping bring this kind of a set of disciplines towards the, if you want to call it, the corporate athletes. Can you talk a little bit about that? Sort of, we know you as someone who's done some really seminal work as part of Microsoft and Satya Nadella there as a leader, and transformation that he's wrought in that organization, and in his stewardship as CEO. So that may be like a fun thing for our audience to kind of learn and discover a little bit, sort of what led to that, and what do you see as a role of these practices being brought into the workplace as well?
Okay, I'll start in reverse order. First of all, the way that I think about it, I love your question, is that what's unique about the mind is that we can't see it. It's completely invisible, but we see the artifact of the mind. We see the artifact of thoughts. Just like with gravity, we can't see gravity, but we can see the artifact of gravity. We can see how it works. And the way we see how the mind works is through behaviors. And the second unique thing about the mind is that we take it everywhere we go. And some philosophical positions might say you don't take your mind anywhere. Okay, but just for a concreteness, as a lack of language here to capture the mind, it goes with you. It is you in some respects. Maybe there's a deeper part of you, but this mental world that we have is part of the fabric of your existence. And if you're on a playing field, if you're in a living room, if you're in a boardroom, you still have the psychological components that are part of that experience. As a matter of fact, it might be the single filter that shapes your experience. Okay, so it completely ports. And so I use the concrete, tangible world of sport in high pressured, high stakes environments to better understand how the mind really works. And then I found myself in American football, in the NFL. And it was the second year that I was there. And Coach Carroll was the head coach of the team. And he comes flying out of his office. This is what we didn't know it at the time, but we're heading into our first Super Bowl together. He comes flying out of his office. Music is blaring. There's just a great energy in the coaches' hallways. And he comes flying out. My office is kind of adjacent to his, and he says, Mike, can you feel what's happening here? And I was just nodding, and I was trying to calculate what he was actually pointing to. And he says, it's amazing. He goes, you can feel it. And what he was talking about is 63 athletes and about 25 alpha coaches, if you will. So the total of that group, about 100 plus alpha competitors with their noses pointed in the same direction together. And he said, we got to write it down. And what he meant is that his genius is on creating a culture where people can point their noses in the same direction and have a really rich feeling about how to work well together. And then my contribution was how to train the psychological skills so that we could push the ceiling of anxiety higher. So we could like, be our very best together. And so together we were doing something that felt very magical. So we wrote it down, and literally like, on a Word document, and we just wrote it down. And then we turned that into like a 3-page deck. And about 6 weeks later, Satya Nadella called, and he says, hey, I've been watching, and I'd love to learn what you guys are doing. Congratulations on winning the Super Bowl. Actually, hold on. 6 weeks after we won the Super Bowl, okay, he called. And he was just a few weeks into his job as the CEO. And he put all of this in his book. So this is not me sharing something out of turn here. So we met, and he's like, I'd love to start working with you guys about how you're building your culture. I want to build a culture, as well. And I'd love your support. And we said, great, we know how to do it for 63 athletes and 25 coaches. I'm not sure how to do it for 200,000. And he says, right, we'll take our time. So it forced us to figure out what the real system is and how to scale that system. And the simplicity of the model is that we have 5 factors we work from. I'm happy to share those. And really, it is helping people work from those 5 factors to train their mind so they can be their very best. And when you have a bunch of people in an organization with shared language around how their minds operate and shared practices on how to train their minds to be just a little bit better, then you start to get a critical mass of change where people are as much focusing at some point on the process of becoming their very best as they are to I would call it the noise of the outcome, the necessary noise of the outcome. And so prior to that, most people, focus on the outcome and don't spend enough time on their inner life. And so this is just a counter rotation from the real pressure to perform, the external pressures, and counterbalancing that with the process to train your mind to be your very best. And if you think that your community is interested in the 5 factors, I'm happy to share what those are.
Yeah, I mean, since many of our listeners are in the business world, and yet highly respectful for the traditions and practices in the pursuit of excellence that you see in highly visible, measurable, world-class competition and therefore athletics, I think it would be wonderful to have them get just a little bit of that glimpse of how you made that transfer and what those 5 factors are. And if you could also just share like where is a best resource for them to go to take a deeper dive. Is it in your book? Is it in Satya's book, or et cetera? I think that would be fun, for them to know as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think I captured. There's 2 books I have. I have an audio book that I did with Coach Carroll that's called Compete to Create, and that captures really the best practices that we found to be valuable.
Congratulations on winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that is very hard to do. And we went back the next year and got back to the Super Bowl, which is incredibly hard. We lost that one in very dramatic fashion, but yeah, thank you for that. So there's an audio book, and you can find really everything on our website called findingmastery.com. And it's got a bunch of resources there, including the 5-factor model. But really the way that the structure works is that the coaches of a sport team, the head coach and the assistant coaches, no different than the CEO and the senior leadership team, need to get on the same page with their language, with their approach to helping people be their very best. Not strategy, not tactics, but how they're deploying just good old simple psychology, not psychotherapy in the hallways, not endorsing coaching and therapy, which is a good thing to endorse, but how are they practicing to commit to work from the inside out in a way that has alignment across each other? Okay, what does that mean? That means that we're going to agree that the cultural attributes that we've hired a big firm to kind of help us get clear on, and the nice collateral that we put these words on the walls, how do we make those come to life? Because we all agree that culture eats strategy for lunch, as Drucker had pointed to. We all agree that the value of when people are humming and they're vibrating and they're really thriving, that the outcomes will be extraordinary, because it is so rare and so special when people work from the inside out and are thriving in life. Of course, the intelligence of a strategy and the way that people produce whatever they're making is going to be exponentially better. But we haven't properly invested in those practices at scale. Just like 20 years ago, when I asked the head coach of a team and he says 90% of this game is mental. And I say, how do you train the mental? And they say, well, I think across town, there's a good psychologist that we refer to for the ones that are, struggling. That's not good enough. That's not how it works. Okay, let me fast forward this. So that was 20 years ago. 15 years ago, they would bring like somebody in-house, one day a week, and kind of have somebody walk in the hallways, or have an office, kind of like the therapist is in, and nobody would go there. Like there was too much taboo. And now fast forward, there's a sports psychologist in the hallways, that it's a part of the bus rides, it's on the sidelines, it's part of team meetings, it is the air we breathe, the water we swim in. And it's not just down the hall, kind of a poorly lit room with a comfortable couch talking about early childhood trauma. It's not that. There's a place for that. But it's not just that. And so that's the same arc that's happening in business, is that what I would do with the head coach and assistant coaches is the same for the senior lead, or the CEO and the senior leader, is like, how are you practicing your psychology? And then what are the words that capture the culture that you're trying to build? And how do these practices support that culture? So that's the unique kind of stitch here, is that mindset skills support the culture. Culture eats strategy for lunch. And when the culture is right, any word that somebody's going to choose for culture is probably pretty vibrant. It's probably like some just good discernment in there. But when people are anxious and they're tired and they're fatigued and overwhelmed, that culture are just words on walls. So when we work from the inside out, we give ourselves a chance to be about that culture, to be honest about bringing our very best to that culture. Okay, so first it's alignment at the senior leadership team, and then we ask them to do the practices of mindfulness, meditation, self-talk, imagery, whatever the ones that fit for them. And then we go a level down and we start to teach their direct reports on that same language and those same practices. And then we've got scaled tactics for cascading across the rest of the organization. And that's courseware, it's video stuff, it's all the classic scale mechanisms. So that's really how it starts. And the 5 factors are quite simple. There's a self-discovery process. There's a whole host of mental skills that we can train every day. Like you can train optimism. It's a trainable skill. You can train imagery. It's a trainable skill. Okay, there's a set of mental skills. That's factor number 2. We can train our psychological framework, which is our outlook, how we think about the world around us and how we think about ourselves in it. You can train that. Okay, there's a whole set of practices for mindfulness. It's the golden thread that ties everything together, right? And then the 5th factor is best practices for recovery, which is net new in the business world. About 10 years ago, when I first popped my head into, enterprise companies, I thought, how are they doing it? Honestly, how are they working at this pace without recovery, without sleep, without eating well, without moving their body well? Like, they can't be thriving. Come to find out, there's like a 30% engagement. People are really quite dissatisfied with how they feel most people inside their jobs. there's a relatively low bar with a very high standard for using the business world as a place for people to thrive. And I think modern leadership is just that, Hitendra, which is the basic application of good psychology. Understanding what makes people thrive from the inside out. It is not the external conditions alone, those matter, but it is the way that you are working with your own psychology, with your own purpose in a collective where people are doing the same, supporting and challenging each other. Therein lies some of the broth that I think is so powerful to help teams win, organizations win, and individuals.
It's very compelling, to hear you speak about it from a place of such rich experience, such a powerful journey that you made in working with some of the exemplars, both on the organizational side and the sports side. One of the things I really like about what I'm sensing and feeling, about your approach, which resonates a lot with my own path and work, is that you are almost like simultaneously speaking the language of wellness and the language of performance, i.e., it's not that there's a wellness department and that caters to a certain need in organizations today to make sure that there is mental health at a very positive level in the organization, and those who are struggling can be attended to, and proactively you can help support people there. And that's nothing to do with how they're actually being driven to pursue excellence and be really good at those seem to be two completely different parts of the organization at times within human resources and all of that. But it has always been for me a very integrative truth, that there is a certain method and an approach you take towards mind mastery, spiritual anchoring, attunement to the moment. Yeah, just a great connection with your purpose and meaning. That any and all of that will both give you a sense of stability, peaceability, and strength from within, resilience from within, but it'll also give you what you need to show up mindfully and just strike just the right chords, that you have to in your relationships, interactions, and challenges that you take on outside. So, is that fair? Is that a fair summary?
I'm so pleased to hear that because this came out of a lot of pain for me. Early on in my life, I was incredibly anxious. And I I didn't know what anxiety was when I was younger. And I'd wake up in the morning and my hands were shaking as I was brushing my teeth. I didn't realize that my mind was out of control with worrying about later. And I facilitated that energy into doing more work, a lot of work, obsessively so, because my nose was buried in research, there was no space for the anxiety. But it was like a snake eating its tail, is that I wasn't living the good life. I was just getting a lot smarter about my craft. And that did provide a competitive advantage to my peers, but it did not provide any type of life that I wanted to really live. And then without the discernment, I brought that energy into my early part of my practice, my professional life. And I made a mistake, Hitendra. I didn't know how to do this better, but I believed that if somebody wanted to be great, and I was close to getting this right because I believe now that we all want to have a great life, but I didn't have the word life next to it. And I believe that if you wanted to be great, there were great sacrifices to make. And one of those sacrifices was your well being. And there was a phrase that we had in high performing sport, which is that high performance begins where wellness ends. So I wasn't alone. So I felt at home in this kind of crazy obsessed world. And the pain is like, how many people did I screw up here? By really over indexing on the standards of excellence as opposed to the balance of a great life. And I know now it came from an athlete. And she sat down and she said, "Look, I'm the best in the world. I don't know my kids, and my marriage is falling apart. Can you help?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, I'd like to think I could, but I don't know. This was before I had a child, and my marriage was falling apart. And I said, I can't imagine a better mission to try to figure this out with you. I'd be honored to do this work with you. And she, like, fell into 1,000 pieces because she wasn't alone. And we ended up doing what I think was some really good, great work. She ended up winning another medal, and she's got a deep, beautiful relationship with her family. So net, it was amazing. So now I've come to understand that this basic drive for all of us to want to live a great life, the same practices of psychology of excellence are the same practice for the psychology of well-being. They are the same. The same practices, the behavioral part of this stuff support wellness and high performance, like good posture. That it's hard to find an athlete that doesn't have good posture, because like having a strong base is also involved in good posture. Some athletes have terrible posture. We can all find them, but for the most part, their frame is really strong. When the rest of us, I'm a professional sitter at this point. It's probably so are you, although you walk more than most people I know. And so, as a professional sitter, it is really easy to slouch forward, to lose the tension in our diaphragm, to hold our spine with dignity. And there's a very interesting thing that we know from research. When you roll your shoulders forward and your chin comes down and forward and your hands are up, that's a fighting posture. Think about that. My head is tucked forward and down, my shoulders are rounded, and my hands are up. That's a classic like boxer's pose. That sends a signal to our ancient brain, there's a threat in the world, protect. And if I look at my son, if I look at myself when I'm undisciplined, if I look at most people in an airport, their posture is rolled forward, their chin is down and out, and their hands are up holding their device. There's no way our brain can detect the difference between that posture and the ancient posture of fighting. So just that simple little act of having a dignified posture where you've got, just like a meditative posture, like your crown is pulled to the heavens, right? Like that type of posture sends a different signal to your brain. We're okay. There's no warring tribe in my space. There's no saber-toothed tiger or wildebeest. We're okay. So that reset in this very fast-paced, always-on world is an essential counterbalance. And it gives us a chance to become more aware of our inner life so that we can do something with all these non-conscious habits and behaviors and thought patterns that are below the surface that are driving the whole thing, right? That for me, part of the investment in awareness building and mindfulness meditation is to become more aware of all of that poorly programmed ways of thinking, and to do something new and fresh and healthy with.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And it's such a great practice to offer up to our audience right there. Just, the mindfulness of posture, and in particular, this notion of becoming a professional sitter and, staying a little bit straight and erect, with your spine. And I want to just kind of add one yoga perspective on it, which I've learned from Yogananda, and the practice of meditation that then I pursued, through his teachings. And what it reveals to us is that in that sort of Eastern mystical sort of teaching, we have an awareness of prana, chi, life energy that is flowing through our body, and enlightening on our senses, and at the same time, the quest for enlightenment, for self-realization, for an upliftment of our consciousness, invites us to reverse that flow and take that prana into our spine and into the higher chakras, the higher centers of consciousness. And any role of that, is facilitated by a straight spine, when you're sitting, in that way in meditation, but also just in everyday life. Now that I've been pursuing that, for 20 odd years, the Kriya Yoga, the meditation practice, just noticing, those changes in my posture and how they impact then the sense I have of being at the very core, of myself, and the prana, awareness. So when it's entering and sort of, really concentrating in the spine, when the spine is feeling a little bit more magnetized, and when you feel a little bit more of that in the higher chakras, any or all of that is something that changing the posture can make it quite different, the experience. So it's quite beautiful when you see this confluence happening, right, between science, timeless wisdom from mystical spiritual traditions, and just even the awareness and understanding that people are built in certain professions like sports.
You know what I really appreciate about where you're taking the conversation is that I've been fortunate to work across like most of the major sports and a bunch of like Olympic stuff and NBA, NHL, and even the adventure-based stuff where people are doing things in the backcountry that it's never been done, highly risk environments, and across big tech, across entrepreneurship, across big industries like venture capital, and the top 1%ers across all of those industries are more similar than dissimilar. And we end up talking about the same type of deep things. So the language is similar. The questions are similar. The life commitments have a different contour, but are similar. And when you look at people that like are truly world changing, they're saying some of the same stuff. Whether it's like a Steve Jobs who is wild in one way but really deep in another, and I know you studied him well, and pick a great Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus, Mother Teresa, right? Like you, and then also you pick some of the ones that really struggled but still gave us many gifts, like Beethoven. I did a bunch of work on Beethoven, about Beethoven, and it was the same quest to express one's inner art. And what we find that many of them, so it's the same similar language, many of them, and hopefully this makes your listener feel more at home, struggle with what I consider to be one of the greatest constrictors for the great life, is that they struggle with this fear of other people's opinions. This fear, am I good enough to fit in? This fear, do I belong? Am I okay for being me? And we had fun. We named it FOPO, fear of people's opinions, as one of the great constrictors for human potential. Beethoven richly suffered from it. And I highlight that in my most recent book about how he was so ashamed that he was losing his hearing that he literally removed himself from pop culture. And he was the best in the world at that time because he didn't want to tell people that the one thing that an artist of his stature should rely on is his hearing. And of all people, he considered himself like a demigod, like of all people, to lose that ability is so shameful that he would rather just become a recluse. And he turned to drugs and solitude as the deep cave of burden he went through. And he ended up coming out the other side and giving us one of the greatest opus of all time, Symphony Number 5 was and Symphony Number 9, like the greatest of the greatest. He couldn't even hear the audience roar, at the end of the celebration. And so, Hitendra, we all go through something. We're all trying to figure it out. None of us get through this world without some real trauma. And the investment in the inner life, your work, hopefully my work as well, is so valuable. I need it. And I'm grateful to have you as a colleague and a friend, and you hold a space in the world of goodness and honesty and potential, and it's wonderful.
That was inspired. That was inspired and inspiring. Yeah, yeah. You're such a beautiful commentator for these beautiful, enduring, timeless ideas. Mike, what is the secret you might conjecture to your success? You're doing work that is very leading edge, very transformational, a community of people who have access to everything and anything and every expert out there. What is the secret to your success in having the privilege to do this work with that kind of a group and also really helping them really succeed with it?
Yeah, thank you so much for the compliment. I don't know there's a secret. I think that one thing that I'll point to, there's a handful of things I'll point to, but one of them is I have a great life partner. She has provided a stability, a base. She's a fire breather and a truth teller. She sees me. and supports me and challenges me. We made a promise to each other after our life. So we made a promise under our vows. And then when our marriage was falling apart, we figured it out together, which I know is quite hard to do. And I feel honored that she did the work with me. I needed to do the work, by the way. She's great. We both needed to do the work, of course, but we recommitted and we recommitted like we were really honest in our promise to each other to be unconditional, in the way that we support and challenge each other. And so I think that that's a really I can't I'm not me without that. And you're pointing to part of me that has had really nice success, but I'm not me without that.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of you and you have with us. That's really heartwarming to hear that. Really heartwarming. In the very, very special moments that I've observed you and known you, interacted with you, I can point to another quality that is, I'm sure, coming shining through in just our conversation, but hasn't been formally articulated. And that is that you have just a tremendous sense of attunement with your environment and a appreciation and a almost sort of a commitment to wanting to affirm the presence of people, affirm their divine spark, and integrate and include them in any group that you're a part of, etc. I've seen that in action in moments where you have been much in demand, and there are people hovering around and wanting to get a little bit more of that sort of joy of your presence with them, and yet you're very attentive to everybody in a very, very thoughtful way. I can only imagine how that sort of plays into the dynamics and relationships that you form with sports teams and athletes and business executives alike.
Well, there's two things I'll pull on because I think this is available for all of us. One is that I had to earn that because I was so anxious as a young person, and I had to earn like the set of principles and practices to live in the present moment because anxiety is the exact opposite, right? And so the whole thing happens. Life happens in the present, as you know better than just about anybody, and your community would deeply respect that statement. So high performance happens in the present moment. All things true, beautiful, good, and amazing happen in the present. And all the stuff that requires honesty happens in the present moment. The hard parts of life also happen in the present. So a fundamental commitment to spend as much time as I possibly can in the present moment gives me access to what is honest, what is true, maybe is another way of saying it. And and so what I bring, hopefully, is my best abilities is being present, and people feel that. And I am very good at working with people that may have made a similar commitment to get to the honest truth of something. And if they're committed in a world-class way to their physical skills, and they're committed in a world-class way to get to the truth of how they're going about their life, that seems pretty magical in and of itself. So I'm selecting my partners in business for that. Like, are you really going to do the work? Like, really, are you going to really do the work? And so that's, I think, is something really important to tune to. Are you living in the present moment? Are you working with people that are committed to get to the honest truth of things as well, which the present moment's a forcing function? And the second is to see the divine spark. I'll tell you, we don't know. Most people don't do the work to know how special they are. And so when you've got somebody like yourself that sees somebody and says, hey, this part of you is, I mean, it just leaps out of your heart. Like, it's so amazing. Like, imagine a life if you did that more often. What would that be like for you? In that question, that framing, you see the thing, you catch the thing, you recognize it, and then you ask the follow-on question, like, what would life be like if you had more of that? And most people are like, oh man, you kidding? Well, you see that? Thank you. Let me imagine. Life would be pretty awesome. Okay, what would it take? What do you think? What would it take? And then that's now we started our agreement with each other.
Incredible, beautiful. You linked some of these practices, like the present moment sort of focus, with even sort of your definition of wisdom. You've said like you can't be in a conversation with someone that's a wise man or a woman and just become wise through that. You can't read a book of wisdom and become wise through that. You have to earn it. Tell us more about your view of sort of how people become wise.
Yeah. I feel as though I'm humbled by you asking because your life is deeply committed to wisdom, the practice of wisdom. But Okay, so the way that I think about it is that just exactly what you said. You can't read about it or just kind of be around it. You have to earn it. And what that means is spending so much time with the essence of something, whatever it is that you're attending to. So when you like use the kind of classic idea of like the wisdom can be found in attending to, a flower, and just like getting down to the deepest, truest nature of the thing is where wisdom is revealed. So the way that I humbly think about it is that when we spend time in the present moment, we start to get to the truer nature of things. Then we start to have insights about how things work. And insights are like, oh, ah, hey, this and that. Oh, these things work. So it's like you're drawing some connections. And then with a bunch of insights, then you get down to that universal wisdom, which is like the simplest way of understanding the true nature of something. And so from present moment to insights to wisdom, and there's really no shortcut that I'm aware of other than speeding up the practices to be in the present moment more often. And in my very concrete world of high performance, I'm using an ancient wisdom practice to help people live in the present moment so they can perform better. And right underneath the surface, I'm always building this narrative like, hey, this is the stuff of wisdom as well. And so it's like above the line, below the line, above the line, the performance piece, below the line, the deep, deep part of the human experience. And some people, some of the folks, they're like, yeah, that's good about that wisdom thing. And some are like, I know, like I feel just so much more clear, like I'm not defined by what I do. My identity is not wrapped into my performance. And like I just feel freer, so there's just so much in the combination of the two that I'm inspired by.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Actually, you're reminding me of another dear friend and a source of great inspiration for me, Josh Waitzkin. His observations and insights about the pursuit of excellence, right? And how one over time can systematically cultivate, right? A pursuit of mastery in any discipline. And I think many of the things that you're talking about here, he would be cheering us on, with how much in his life those have mattered a lot, And there's one pursuit. For us who don't know, I mean, he's been the junior world junior American, chess champion, and then has moved on to push hands Tai Chi and become the world champion in that. And since then has gone on to coach hedge fund owners and their teams, in the world of sort of high pressure finance and everything in between. So anyway, and I'm sure him.
I do. Josh and I do know each other. He is a great student of mastery. I'm curious about so if you were to think about an executive or an athlete that is honestly pursuing their very best, they're committed to mastery of self and mastery of craft. How many minutes a day would you dedicate to training the inner life, to building the psychological skills, deepening awareness? How many minutes a day would you suggest would be in your range?
Interesting question, and I would love to compare notes on that. So for me, I would recommend a minimum of 30 minutes, but I would also say that, the sky's the limit. You could do it for 2 hours. You could do it for even more than 2 hours. And while that sounds like a lot and a big sacrifice to make from the practicalities and exigencies of your day, the mind has such incredibly untapped power in it that the rewards are disproportionate in how much they can then guide you and engage you with what it is that you have to do. And part of it comes from, a rising awareness. I wouldn't say it's something that I would claim and expect and seek that every one of us has from the very beginning of that journey. But over time, this awareness just starts to grow in us that our capacity is not as limited to what we feel biologically we have within our physical self, but is in some ways a capacity that is really a access point that our mind gives us to the infinite, to the wisdom in the universe, to the strength, the power, the energy in the universe, and we become a channel. And the more we become the channel, and if what we are doing is in service of, something noble, then yeah, you know, we basically have our ego step aside, and something flows through us and does the work on our behalf. It just does the work for us, right? And so to strive towards becoming the channel, at which point mastery becomes effortless. That's where the investment really pays off. The more we work towards building that practice of cultivating, our soul qualities, tuning ourselves with our soul wisdom, and drawing our strength, from there. Anyway, so that would be my answer. Minimum of 30 minutes, no limit to the maximum. And ultimately, you will be drawn based on the increasing pull you feel towards starting to see a certain dissolving happening of the boundary between your individual self and the universe around you. What are your thoughts?
I love it. And well, I want to answer, and then let me double click first, if it's okay. Let's say you had an hour for people to do the internal work. How much of that would be, let's call it a mindfulness practice, and how much of that would be other skills or other practices that you would, and what would those skills or practices be?
Yeah, yeah, wow. If you have a very effective, deep contemplative practice, something that takes you to a place of stillness, of a connection with like pure source, pure spirit, the very essence of your being. You've used the idea of essence, right? In what you were saying. If you have a good practice like that, then my own experience and understanding is that it can actually be such a more effective and accelerative approach towards personal transformation, that your intuition then becomes so honed that it will, yeah, transcend and overcome some of these human limitations that otherwise in your thought process and your limiting beliefs, which I know you talk a lot about, and you highlight the need to help us, shift and rescript some of our, confining identities and beliefs. And any or all of those start to get healed and revealed and ultimately transcended, in a deep, disciplined, contemplative practice. So if you have that, then you could basically just make even 95% of the hour just that, and 5%, do a little bit of shifting and adjusting here and there. 45 minutes on that, 15 minutes on the more sort of cognitive level of analyzing, reflecting, thinking, shifting your thoughts, etc. But most people lack that. Most people don't have that. And if that's the case, then I wouldn't recommend that they struggle with, or they just sort of do some more baseline practice for the whole hour. In that case, to me, the application of things like cognitive behavior therapy can be incredibly valuable, as a complement to the more stillness practice that a mindfulness discipline might give them, or breath awareness, for example, which is great, but by itself, to me, is not one of the techniques I would qualify as, the most deep contemplative, work.
I completely support that. So would you start with meditation, mindfulness, contemplative practices at, like, say, would you start at 5 minutes, then work to 7 minutes, then work your way up to 60 minutes? Or would you go the other way and say, no, 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 you need to do some work. We're going to sit you down for, 60 minutes and just do a meditation for an hour, which as I'm asking it, that sounds ridiculous, even in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. I mean, just with athletics, right? You got to build your stamina, and you got to break it into, different sort of building blocks. Just the idea of sitting still, physically sitting still, and really still, so that you don't even,
It's so
you know,
painful.
onto an urge of like scratching, all that.
It's so
I mean,
painful. Yeah.
exactly. For in the Western world, for many of us, we haven't really honored that capacity and the power of that. We have considered it a waste of time. If somebody's like doing nothing, and so just making the body still, and then making, of course, the mind still, and having those practices. It's a cultivated craft, as you know, and so the former seem to me more effective, appropriate, and practical for people. But you in this moment, Mike, are doing exactly what I know you to be so gifted for, which is just turn into a sponge and just kind of draw out, ideas from people. It's beautiful. I want to be in the service of our audience as well, because I know that they're really enjoying this conversation with you and drawing things out of you. So give me your own guidance on these same beautiful questions you've just asked, especially when you think about sort of applying it to the business world and to athletes, many of whom may not be perhaps intrinsically at times invested in some of these pursuits of truth seeking and self-discovery, and now they're seeing it as something that you're inviting them to do to pursue their performance goals, at work. And
when I was younger, I made the classic mistake of like, this is what it takes. I don't know what to tell you. Either you're going to make the commitment or not, and like, let's say, I don't know, 20 minutes of meditation or 20-minute sessions, if that's your training, or there's some research right now that, would suggest at around 12 minutes, you start to see some benefits in brain structure changes and whatever, but not for the practice of wisdom. I had this posture like, look, here's what the best do. Here's what research suggests. Like, I don't know what to tell you. If you can't find 20 minutes to an hour a day, I wish you the best. And that's kind of a jerk mentality. Now, what I've come to embrace this idea of meet people where they sweat, meet people where they are. And what I was always pushing against early on was, I'm too tired, I'm too busy, I'm too overwhelmed with I don't have that. And that's nice for your athletes, or that's nice for the best in the world, but I'm just a moron struggling in this world, and I can't do what they do. Like, there was all of this negative kind of language around it. And so now, when I've adopted this idea, meet them where they are, and then slightly challenge them, just a slight challenge. So it's like, maybe it's just 1 minute a day, as ridiculous as that seems, and then build on it. But I am pretty aggressive in challenging the level of growth. So if it's 1 minute and that's where we're starting, but they really are committed to it, great. And then, okay, so if you can do one, you can probably do two. Let's do 2 minutes today, and we just build on that. So what I would say optimal is a minimum, I go 20 minutes, and then optimal, I go 1 hour. And I have John Donovan, who was on the Finding Mastery podcast, say to me, Mike, I started with 15 minutes before I started my day. This was like probably 20 years ago for him now. He was the CEO, one of the CEOs of AT&T, and he had, I think, 120,000 people under his leadership. And he said, I started with 15 minutes, and then I realized I was so much better in conversations, in emails, and just kind of the way I felt in life, that I doubled it. And then I was at 30 minutes before I started my day after I woke up, and I was even better. Like, it just felt like I was on a glide path, and I still had some stresses and pressures, and of course, but like, I was better. Mike, I doubled it again. He went to 4 hours. I said, before you went to work? He said, I did. He said, so there's some reading in there, and he's a Christian. So there's some reading in there. He would read, so he was reading the Bible. He was reading passages of wisdom from other texts. He was meditating. He was journaling and writing, and he was doing some sort of mindful movement. So part of those 4 hours was also what some people might look at him and think it's fitness, but he was practicing being tuned to his body while he was moving, not listening to music, not solving work problems, but feeling his muscles moving while he was moving. So that was really inspiring for me. And what I know from elite athletics is the upper limit of physical training is 4 hours a day. That's the upper limit for the best in the world. And the upper limit for mental training for most of them is like 90 minutes. And the average is somewhere around 10 minutes a day. Yeah. So anyways, that's a reflection.
well, thank you for sharing that. And that's an incredible story you just shared about Donovan. One of the things it reminded me of is, I've discovered John Denver and his song, Annie's song, right? Which is a song that I've loved, throughout my life.
Wait, what is the name of it?
So it's called Annie's song. Annie's song.
Are you going to
Yeah.
sing it?
You fill up my senses.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
And So it's very devotional, and I've loved that song, and it was, I think, his most loved song amongst his fans as a country singer. And so what I discovered is that how the song took form is that he was having a real struggle in his relationship with his wife, and he happened to be, going out skiing, and he, in that struggle, that was happening with his wife, he was on the ski lift, and it was going up to carry him to the top of the mountain, and the whole song just came to him. The whole song, Annie's song, just came to him. And here is an individual known for a meaningful body of work, but within that there is this one song which is quite iconic, and it came to him so effortlessly, and it came to him so instantly, right? And I just use that as an example to help me recognize the optical illusion of time. The idea that to do great work you need to actually spend a lot of time, and and of course there is a certain power to grit, and perseverance and all of that, but there are also these other, like, latent capacities that people have that allow them to somehow contact greatness in just the moment they need it, right? And in his case, it was probably because he was churning the ether with really deep felt feelings because of what he was going through with his wife. And that churning just led to a certain revelation.
And I would add that he had the craft to be able to
The
either
craft.
remember it or put the
Perfect.
words to it, or like there was a craft that he had invested in, and that he
Yes.
was open, feeling all that stuff and open to it. And I love that so much. I'm gonna go re-listen to that, and I love that so much because some of the best in the world talk about flow state, and there's a science around flow and what leads us to be in those states more often. And one of the one of the core characteristics to reach that state of flow where it feels like it's completely fluid and you're open is deep focus. So when you have the ability to focus deeply and you can string together a couple of those present moments and maybe just extend it a little bit longer, you can slip right into that flow state where most of us at 3 seconds or 8 seconds are popped out. And this is where the practice of starting over 1,000 times, from a meditative practice, can actually help us stay more connected to the present moment. And so sometimes rich emotions will do it, and sometimes practices will do it. And I want to share one more story with you. Is that the coach that I just got done working with, that was part of the team for the Olympic silver medal? His name is Marcio Sicoli. He's Brazilian. He's got all the flair and emotionality that you might, conjure up from, a vibrant a Brazilian coach. And something he said before every game, there's a warm up. And he would say, okay, now in the warm up, just go get loose, get ready, da da da. And it was our warm ups were really intense. And then there's another moment where we would all circle up, and it was kind of final touches, that a final message that he would give. And he would consistently say, okay, remember, go out there and open up your senses. You just see the athletes like, oh, I know how to do that. Go get in touch with that sense part of you. And it's such a just, he doesn't even realize the depth of that statement. And it was just worth noting, like, for all of us to open up our senses a bit more is such a animalistic, and I mean that in the most vibrant way, like the physicality of our senses just teaching us and being purely available to those is really rich. And so I just want to share that note because it was so present.
Yeah, yeah. Lovely. And it's such a great rearticulation of this idea of being fully present, right, in the moment. There is talking about stories and recognizing that we're coming close to the end of our time together, painfully, regrettably so. But there is a story in the First Rule of Mastery, your book, that I'd also love to have you just, share with our friends, if you're open to it, Mike. And that is the story of Jorge Mario Bergoglio.
Of all the stories, of course you would know this one and grab onto this one. It's so good. You are only the second person in all the interviews I've done around the book to bring that one forward. Most people go to the Olympians and Beethoven, and yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
they're all great stories. They're all great stories, but this one I think would be lovely for our audience here.
as a shorthand, I would love to know that your takeaway from the story, and and then maybe I can go back and share why I was inspired to share this story.
Well, there are many reasons I love the story. One is that, we are sometimes so quick to judge people on the basis of the surface of things. And one of the surface of things thing is just what role they're playing in the world. And regardless of what we might, aspire for in terms of creating a more equal world, the fact is that even in the very egalitarian communities, we still have some amount of, unspoken hierarchies and, ways to think about some people as being bigger or better or more successful or accomplished or whatever than others, and certain roles in society being, smaller than others, et cetera, right? And so what I love about the story is that you get really challenged on those preconceptions, on those notions, and humbled in many ways, right?
So the reason I wanted to write that was almost exactly for what you just said. The second piece is I started my career as a gas attendant, so pumping gas, and no one in my family went to college. And so my chartered path was pretty clear. Blue collar, maybe a white collar kind of salesperson type job. And there's nothing wrong with that. My dad was a very successful salesperson, but there was no college. It was the school of hard knocks. And so I wanted to share the origin story to be able to highlight that we all come from somewhere. Just to make it more contemporary, is I was watching this will timestamp our conversation, but I was watching the Democratic National Convention last night. Our vice president and her husband both talked about working at McDonald's. Like, so we have a history. That one of their first jobs was certainly the husband. I recall clearly. We have a history, and those histories are comprise so much of how we understand what we're capable of and how we're tested and what we can become are still part of our history, even when they don't seem favorable and even when they don't seem as though it can work out. I'm so inspired by the agency of humans to really take control of their micro choices and to be connected to others that support and challenge them to make those micro choices in the most healthy, organic, optimized way. That was my hope in the arc of the story. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Do you want to reveal to the audience who that person ended up becoming, or shall we leave that in suspense? Which I'm perfectly fine leaving them in suspense because
Yeah,
yeah.
you know what I wish I would have done? I wish I would have left the Beethoven one for suspense as well.
Yeah, okay. So let's leave this one in suspense because folks, for all of us listening, it's quite unbelievable what you will discover about Jorge when you go and read that story.
You would not be able to guess it from the origin story unless people look up the name now.
Yeah, yeah, which they've probably forgotten except for Jorge, because I've repeated that now. But listen, the book is replete with just so many great insights, and you can see how, deeply reflective and articulate you are, Mike, which comes across in the book as well. I want to just read one excerpt from the book about just like the way you approach and define mastery. I think it's a great way to sort of close out my part of like the conversation here, and then I want to invite you to share a few final thoughts here with us. And one thing I'd be drawn to give you just a little bit of space to think about it as I read this quote from your book is just with all that you've accomplished, all that you've done, and that was such a beautiful thing for you to even share, your own roots. Um, where are you headed next? Like, what intrigues you the most in terms of further expanding your vistas, and what are you most curious about to learn? We would love to learn that. So, but before we go there, so here's the quote from the book about mastery. I love it because it's so intricate and well thought through. You say, mastery is an inner directed life, externally expressed. Just hear that. That's like music. Mastery is an inner directed life, externally expressed. With no finish line to cross, mastery is a love affair with experience, honesty, truth, and continual exploration. One cannot step on to the path of mastery until you make a fundamental commitment to work from the inside out. Technical excellence alone is not sufficient to travel the path to mastery. If you are not creating from a place in alignment with who you are just a great performer, but not a master. And there's more to the quote, but I thought I'd stop there. And, it's such a powerful exhortation that you've given us here at the end that, there's the external acquisition of skills and the technical mastery and all of that. But if you're not creating from a place in alignment with who you are, in my work, we call that your inner core, your soul, from a place that is in alignment with who you are. If you're not doing that, then you're just a great performer, not a master. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, I think you're on it. Like, again, it makes perfect sense that you would pull that insight and that quote out. I actually struggled quite a bit to be able to get that that phrase together, and then it just hit me. No different, maybe in John Denver, but in that kind of the ilk there. But I was just trying to thread the two together, like the inner outer, which I know that you've done a beautiful job of. And yeah, so I think that it's a complicated thing to think about mastery. And I want to make it as simple as I can for me. And I'm trying to create every day a living masterpiece, which is quite ambitious. And for me, a living masterpiece is one requirement is that I'm really present throughout the day and I'm holding the depth of the emotional experience, and I'm challenging my ability to explore the upper limits of my capabilities. So there's an emotional component, there's a skill expression, and there's a present moment experience. And when I do all of that, I feel like I'm really in line to, I think you used the word core. I'm really in line. I think about it alignment, probably the same as you, with a divine, an energy that I don't know how to explain or even put words to, and the physical. When I'm in that alignment, that's what a living masterpiece is. But I have to really, for me, I just have to get to the upper limits of my capacities. I have to really stretch myself up there. It's not, there's an agitating state before that thing I'm talking about, which I wish it wasn't so. And maybe I don't understand it well enough, but I'm still in the phase where I don't know how to like kind of blink my eyes or snap my fingers and I'm in that state. There's a decision, there's a commitment and some action to get still, to be connected, and then it's agitating, and then I just might get there. And so, anyways, that's how I'm thinking about the whole thing right there.
It's incredible. I mean, you really exemplify in your words, in your spirit, in your, pursuits in life. What my hope is that we can just at a more broader level evolve in humanity. This idea that you have a profession, you have a role, you have a family, you have, deep social engagement, and yet all of this and any of it is coming from a place of, a quiet hunger for truth and, self-realization and a ever curious, mind that is constantly experimenting, evolving, learning from the outside and the inside, and developing, one's own practices that are helping you get somewhere. And then wherever you are, you're not, fully satisfied. You're content, and peaceful, but you're not satisfied, and you're questing for what's the next frontier, and I see that, not next inner frontier, not just outer, right? And that's beautiful.
And it's hard not to crave or want, and surrender and let go. It's that's part of my challenge in there. And yeah, thank you for highlighting that. And I loved how the counterbalance is that you said it earlier, which is that this kind of ease of life, or this ease of how you move through life, because you've got this developing awareness. And with that awareness, you're able to micro navigate just a little bit easier. And what once used to throw you off no longer does. And over time, like you think about the most wise of them all, it feels like they get knocked off center rarely, so that's aspirationally where I'm trying to spend more time as well.
Well, as we bring this to a closure, I think on behalf of all our guests, let us invite you to also go back and give a big thank you to your wife for
Yes.
who sculpt you into who you are, and enable and support the life, then the impact of the work that you've done. Because that was so beautiful in how you expressed the source of your success, and I think it plays to one of the ideas that I'm very drawn to expanding my consciousness around in years years ahead, which is that looking at each of us not as a isolated entity, but as a co-created entity, right? And we are the sum total of so much that has flowed to us from from people, both
Beautifully
you know
said.
generations, but also those around us who have loved us and supported us, and perhaps guided us and inspired the best in us. And a little bit of us has gone into them, and a lot of them has gone into us, isn't it?
It's a first principle. We're all interconnected here. Everything is, and I want to thank you for creating this space and for to play and to muse and to share some ideas in new ways. There's a lot of new ways that I was putting some words together, which is always really fun to do. So thank you for that. And I actually feel like we should maybe complete, the pay off the story of who we're, Jorge, who we were talking about earlier, or we can do it on social media, but which would be a modern way of doing it. But what do you should we pay it off or should we do it on social media?
And whatever you're called to do, Mike, I trust you.
Let's pay it off in this way, which is this is a person that probably has been so influential to billions of people that we will all recognize his commitment to the spiritual life. And I just want to one more time, let me listen to my intuition. Let's just pay it off. Pope Francis. And so you never imagine, we think that the Pope or the Dalai Lama were kind of like, they just arrived one day, just like they are. And just like when we see world-class athletes, they arrive just like that. But we miss all of the training. We miss all of the early experiences before media or attention was on them. One of my clients is Felix Baumgartner, who is very public about her work. He jumped from 130,000 feet. He was the first person to leap from that height, and the world thought he was crazy and he was going to die. But we missed when at age 3 he jumped off the curb and thought that was the greatest thrill. And at age 7, when he jumped out of a tree from a branch from a tree, and he thought that was amazing. And we missed all of those scar tissues, broken bones, challenges, thrills, excitement, insights, wisdom at the early ages to one day, in this case, he was dawned to be Pope. And so that's the real nature of the story. And so thank you for bringing that forward.
Well, what a beautiful and uplifting note and a personage to end on. His work is not easy. He's got a major responsibility. He's trying to modernize the storied institution, and it's amazing the path that he has been on, that you have shed more light on, because I hadn't known about that part of his life at all. So
Yeah, that's cool. How fun is that?
yeah, it's incredible. Mike, you have a lifelong and open invitation to coming back to Intersections. If you feel like you want to just shoot the breeze, there are some new ideas, thoughts, stories percolating, and you want to test them with our audience, etc.
I love it. Thank you.
Just reach out. Of course, we will be staying in touch, and I'll be looking forward to many moments and conversations and learnings from you, and we'll formally also invite you back.
Yeah. My friend. Thank you so much.